watch it in the woods. It is not a fairy tale, fairy tale, fairy tale.
You're listening to That's Pretty Dark,
the podcast where we talk about all of the entertainment that scared us as children
and still haunts us as adults. So grab your flashlight and join us as we take a frightfully nostalgic look over our shoulders
and under our beds
and in our closets.
And together we'll realize, whoa, that's pretty dark.
Pretty dark. I love this guy so much.
He's very cool. I do like that. The fact that his mouth opens that much is a little concerning. I mean, that's what my jaw probably does. That's the TMJ in me.
Yeah, I can unhinge your jaw.
My jaw probably unhinges pretty much like that.
Probably not. Probably not.
I had baby Kaylin just had like a lot of hobbies, you know, like I took horse riding and I was in gymnastics. And,
not sleeping.
You know, it was very cool. Didn't sleep. I like to draw.
Yeah, hosting cocktail parties at your parents' house when your parents were gone.
Yep. I hosted a radio show. Did you know that about me? I hosted an online radio show when I was like 13.
No.
Yeah, it was like an online radio thing. And I can't remember. I met these people probably through Neopets, honestly.
How does that work?
And I ended up being a DJ for a radio show. I mean, it was probably not legal.
An online radio
because I would like line up music from my own library. Because at the time we all had libraries of music that were just MP3s that had been ripped from LimeWire or wherever. Sure. I mean, no, I didn't. If you're a legal authority, I absolutely didn't do that.
Just because you confess doesn't mean they can prove it. It doesn't hold up in court.
But what I was getting to is that I also had a ventriloquist dummy.
Really?
And I thought I did some magic for a little while. I was like into like, you know, sleight of hand and then, you know, card tricks and all those sorts of things. And then I got a little ventriloquist dummy. It's probably because my family always vacationed in Gatlinburg.
Oh, yeah. Lots
so
of, you know, knickknacks and toys and
stuff. All of
stuff.
those things.
That's crazy.
And I wanted to be all of those things.
Yeah.
I wasn't good at it.
Do you still have it?
I don't know, actually. I found it in my parents' house, like in one of mine or my sister's closets, because we both had them, because I couldn't get something without my sister also getting one, obviously.
Yeah.
I feel like it's been within the last 5 or 6 years that I found it at their house, but I don't know if they sold it or gave it to a younger child who might appreciate it. But
that's crazy cool. That's so fun. Yeah, you should definitely read the Watcher novel, because it's all about how like Jan has to cater to her younger sister and she feels stuck in place and in time and all this stuff because she's 15 going on 16.
Big relate.
And Ellie gets everything that she doesn't get to have now because she's supposed to be like responsible and like mature and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's relatable. A little too relatable.
Kaylin was talking about ventriloquist dummies because I have a skull that I got from Joanne. And the
Halloween capital, honestly. They have some good
loud
stuff this year.
It's cool. I turned it off because Kaylin can't even hear it anyway.
Yeah, he's telling me that it's so loud, but the Zoom is condensing the sound, so I hear nothing. So you guys are probably hearing it in the recording.
Yeah.
So right now, I hear nothing.
I'm going to hold it over here.
But he scared me to death because we were preparing to record and I was just sitting here like looking at my phone, literally singing to myself, and I looked up and he was just holding the skull in front of the camera.
I have to hold it way back here. It's so loud.
I can hear something.
I'm going to let this play while we record the entire episode.
Yeah, perfect. I'm sure Editing Christian won't hate that at all. By the way, listener,
editing me.
Welcome to our chaos.
Welcome to That's Pretty Dark.
My name is Kaylin.
My name's Spooky Christian because it's September 1st.
Okay, I'm Spooky Kaylin.
Oh, you're also Spooky. We're your Spooky Ghost hosts for the official, oh my God, Kaylin is here.
Spooky season is
Spooky
here.
Season has arrived.
Not to be confused with October, because that's coming soon. But September, as we all know, it's the anticipation that's the best part of like pretty much everything. Mm-hmm. So September is in some ways even better.
Is it Labor Day?
It's not Labor Day today. Labor Day's on a Monday.
I don't know how it works. I just know you don't wear white after Labor Day, you're going to go to jail. I start September 1st and I go spooky season all the way to pretty much the sad letdown of the week after Christmas.
Yeah.
When you're like getting ready to like think about
like
your
January
future
7th.
and like,
oh my God.
So anyway, but it's a really great time to be alive and I feel it. I can feel the magic. I woke up on this rainy morning and I just knew it was going to be a good day to record.
I know.
Happy to be here. So
you were very chipper in your text messages to me, which is not a common occurrence.
I sent you an exclamation point.
Not a common occurrence.
I know. Not first thing in the morning anyway.
At like whatever time that was, 10, 11.
For me, that's first thing in the morning. Oh, don't knock my sleeping habits.
I only do because I'm jealous.
Yeah, well,
I think my body would function way better if I slept on your schedule. But
I have no excuse for how
alas,
my body functions. What we're going to do is this. I just go in a big swirl. All my notes here for this movie, there's so much. I'm doing the movie and the book, and I watched the new movie last night, the 2017 Watcher in the Woods.
There is so much content for this series.
I'm beginning to blur the lines of what's what.
Which was what.
Because the new movie is a conglomeration of both the book and the old movie. Now I'm forgetting what was in the book.
You're supposed to keep us on track here.
I'm the one who's supposed to keep everybody in line and tell them what they're missing out on by not reading the book.
The good thing, though, is that I have only seen the original movie.
Yeah.
So I'll be like, I don't recognize that. You'll know that it wasn't from the original movie.
Yeah, you keep me in check. I'll keep the listeners informed. You keep me in check.
What else is
And
new?
we'll have a good time. Yeah, what else is new? You guys buckle in. Decorate your house while listening to this episode.
That would be
your
such
place.
a great activity while you're listening. Send us pictures, guys.
Ooh, that too.
Send us pictures of your Halloween decorations. Nothing would make me happier than to just see a bunch of y'all getting spooky. That is so fun to me.
And if you want to know what I'm listening to while recording this episode right now, currently in my ears, Susie and the Banshees.
I'm so jealous that you can do that.
I can. I don't know how I can, but I can. In part 1, we discussed why Disney tried to dip their toe into the horror genre back in the late 70s. And we met a few of the folks they entrusted to bring their own Exorcist to life. But all of these people seem to have their own vision for what the movie needed to be, resulting in a jumbled mix of horror tropes and plot lines that have both confused and terrified young audiences for over 40 years now.
Most of our feedback from part 1 and people that are talking with us about this film, most of them were like, I genuinely didn't know this was an actual movie because they saw a piece of it or a part of it and it just didn't connect with the rest of the film. Or the same idea of like a fever dream that we talk about a lot where it's just something that we saw once and then it never again entered our consciousness. This one was very under the radar and like you talked about in part 1 for good reason because Disney basically tried to bury it.
They really did.
So we shouldn't even have the memories of this film that we do, making it feel even more like weirdly Mandela effect-ish.
They wish we didn't have memories of it.
Right. They wish they could have wiped our memories in addition to wiping everything else.
Right.
So,
and it's really interesting, speaking of that, we mentioned a guy last time who published this like crazed article online that I thought was anonymous. Turns out his name is Scott Bosco. Scott Michael Bosco. Not Michael Scott.
Not Michael Scott.
He was a special projects consultant for Anchor Bay Entertainment to release a DVD of The Watcher in the Woods. But there are just so many juicy details in his online rant and facts that he supposedly sent to Roy Disney that we're going to do a whole Patreon breakdown of the stuff online.
This dude.
From him. That I don't even know if it is him.
He kind of paints the whole story of like getting the film republished, right, on DVD.
Well, yeah, but apparently this is the source of all the claims that Ron Miller is the cause of this film's failure. So it might come down to whether or not Scott Bosco is credible. So gonna keep digging, gonna keep seeing.
Wow.
But the only thing I need to mention about that is he said after he sent the facts to Roy, more heads rolled at the company then than during the French Revolution.
I saw that too.
But I will say personally, watching this movie again with all the information, the movie is much more cohesive than it feels on a first viewing. It's just hard to follow. There are still plot holes and a lot of red herrings and seemingly forced bits of unnecessary dialogue throughout. To me, it's that schizophrenic nature of the film that is a huge part of what makes it scary.
Yeah.
Just all the tone shifts. And
I can absolutely see that.
Even like smiles. Jan's smiling feels off.
Yeah.
It doesn't belong in the movie for some reason.
I think that they put so many things into the film, it was never clear what actually belonged.
Right.
Nothing did because everything was there. You know, like there was no way to belong because it was too much. There was too much variation in the plots and the tones and the scares, really, that they were trying to cook up.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned red herrings. And that is one thing that I feel like I liked about it as I watched it, is that it did the red herring thing, but you didn't know what was red herring, but there were so many leads you could have followed.
Right.
That you knew some of them had to be.
Communism, just a red herring.
Oh, God.
And a lot of the use of the red herrings is they used horror tropes for tropes' sake. And I'm going to talk about a few of those things.
Yes.
But I think that's where that came from, too. They were like, we can just use this classic thing that's so scary and throw the audience off.
People know this is scary. This is like an immediate reaction that we're going to get this idea.
2 screams, 1 skull.
Nice.
Thanks. Tonight, we will dig into all the darkness of this movie and do our best to sort out the remaining confusion, much of which can be explained by the Watcher novel. And since we'll be referencing it a lot more this go around, I want to start off by giving a little background on the novel and its author, which I should have put in part 1, admittedly. But you know what? Hindsight's a bitch, so. It was originally published as A Watcher in the Woods in 1976 by Athenaeum Books, but then it was reprinted by Scholastic in 1980, with the title changed to The Watcher in the Woods to tie in the release of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
This is the copy of the book that I have.
I see it.
Kaylin can see it. You guys can't. And it's funny, I had to make this note. The back cover has a couple odd mistakes. Like, for example, in the book, the Curtis family, they're the Carstairs family. Mm-hmm. And it names Mrs. Aylwood as Mrs. Carstairs. And it says Ellie is 10, even though she's 7.
Huh.
Which is just odd.
Yeah, that's really strange.
They're just like weird, careless mistakes.
Yeah.
Its author, Florence Ingle Randall, wrote 5 novels and over 100 short stories. Although Watcher is probably her most famous, thanks to the movie. Mm-hmm. Her novel, The Almost Year, was recognized as a 1971 American Library Association notable book. And Boston University has an annual short story competition for female students called the Florence Ingle Randall Fiction Award. I just think it's nice.
That is nice. I'd love to achieve that sort of status.
Yeah, to be remembered for something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Not only did Randall have experience with writing stories for teenagers, but she especially excelled at pairing interpersonal drama with supernatural forces, likely taking a few pages from the works of Shirley Jackson herself.
I was just going to say that.
And who could blame her?
It was like coming to my tongue. I really feel like
tip of my tongue.
That intersection of like interpersonal drama and supernatural is where that's what I love personally. That's the type of like horror media that I love. We've talked about that before.
Same.
Shirley Jackson does that super well. Mike Flanagan, director, does that super well.
Yeah.
So all of that is right up our alley. So it's surprising to me partly that I hadn't seen this film before that, but also because the film didn't exactly line up to that standard.
Mm-hmm. From what I've read, each of Randall's novels featured female leads forced to confront dark entities. In one, a poltergeist. In another, sleeping evil. And in another, a sinister and hateful force from the past.
Don't we all have those?
Yeah, right. They might all be intended for young adults in the 60s and 70s, but they all sound like a really damn good time to me.
Me too.
I want to read them.
As long as they're not actively happening to me.
I mean, I could go for a little haunting every now and then.
Yeah, that's fair.
But the times I have had it,
you don't want it.
I didn't like it. That's
the thing. You want it. It's just the wanting what you can't have, you know?
Yeah. The wanting comes in waves.
We both feel the wanting in waves.
The waves of want. Sounds like a really steamy novel. Set on the beach.
Oh my God, it does.
Beach house. Nights in Rodanthe, probably. Because Watcher is a story for teenagers, not children, the book doesn't rely on spooky sensationalism and constant thrills to hold the attention of the reader. Those bits are replaced by authentic interpersonal drama and copious amounts of waxing poetic on existentialism and the universe.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Like every teenager, every teenager does.
Every teenager I knew when I was a teenager.
That was me, actually, yeah. But for that very same reason, when Florence Randall finds a moment to throw a punch, she doesn't hold back. Particularly in Jan's musings on what happened to Karen all those years ago. Not the least of which is the almost rhythmic repetition of certain phrases like, Karen went for a walk in the woods. And the hollow echo of gut-wrenching sentiments such as the tormented ghost of a teenage girl wandering those woods because her body was never found. Watching her own lonely mother grow old with time and unbounded grief, unable to give or receive comfort of any kind.
One of the deepest, darkest parts of the film, too. Mm-hmm. She's stuck in time as well. her mother is.
And many of the plot's devices are similar enough between the book and film. For example, mirrors breaking and mirror world imagery. Jan and Ellie being affected by the Watcher, the puppy being named Narek, and the creepy old house nearby ominous woods.
Okay.
But the main differences, however, are Jan's crushing existentialism, how Karen went missing, and how the conflict is resolved. Oh, and Mark is much more involved.
Well, yeah, they really just tossed him in as an afterthought to the film. So I assumed, hopefully, he had a different life as a character somewhere else.
Yeah. He helped reveal a lot more of the history and the details because he knows the locals.
He was there. Yeah. It made sense to me that he would be there. But in the movie, he just kind of appeared.
They don't really use him like that in the movie at all. Yeah. He's just a handsome Evan Peters looking kind of guy.
He does look like Evan Peters.
I'd love nothing more than to just sit here and do a full side-by-side compare contrast of the entire book and movie. But nobody got time for that, especially because it's spooky season. We got things to do. So tonight, we will be focusing on the disappearance and return of Karen and all the darkness in between. Because as the Vulture article says, to quote that again,
it's a good one.
We feel like the entire movie was but a fever dream.
There we go.
The specter of some long ago mixture of stark images that was initially delivered to us at too impressionable an age. And I really wish I'd seen this as a kid. I think it would have scared the hell out of me.
I wish I had too. I've felt that throughout this series. Like, I wish that I had the perspective of having seen this as a kid.
I think it would have shaped my nightmares in a very distinct way.
And I'm going to be honest. This is Kaylin's confession.
Let's hear it.
When you first brought this up as a topic, I had heard of it. It seemed to fit the show. I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. But I felt strangely disappointed in it. I think maybe because I don't have that perspective as having seen it from a kid. But obviously, we're going to cover things that we haven't seen.
I've done it more than you have.
You have done it more often than I have.
I'm kind of used to it now.
Right. And I will get there. But when you first brought it to me, I was kind of like, like, do people care? Is this a thing? And then the more we dove into it, once I watched it through, it was like, yeah, this has a home here. This has to be here because it is the epitome of what we talk about. It's that in between of childhood and adolescence, the uncertainty of what the story needs to be, and then how that plays out, and then how it did affect the people that saw it at the time. Oh, yeah. This is such like a unique piece of media, and I can't think of anything else just like it off the top of my head at all, because it's so of the time, but also timeless because it has all of these adolescent themes and apparently a lot of existential themes too. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So just, listener, if you were unsure or if you hadn't seen it before, you saw the series come up for us, know that you weren't alone in that either. But I think we've made a home for it. And I think it's... we have. I don't know. I just think it's cool.
I think one of my favorite things too is when I see people comment on the post about it and they say, I've heard of this, I haven't seen it, or I've always meant to watch it, now I have a reason to.
Yeah, right?
I like that too. And that's kind of how I approach this podcast.
Because that's the idea that we're shining this flashlight on the things that weren't either appreciated at the time or they weren't understood at the time. That's something that we do very often. So
you're talking about the coming of age aspect too. This is YA literature before YA
was a thing.
Was like on bookshelves at the store.
That's huge, honestly, because that shift in media,
it built what young adult fiction is.
Yes. Yeah. That is so cool to me because YA was like the cornerstone of my growing up. Like all I did was read YA.
I did for a while too.
I think you're exactly right. This was that before that existed.
That's why I love it so much. It feels so much more tied to humanity than like modern YA fiction. It feels so much more about the human condition. Well, last time we left you guys in the English woods, waking up to the enchanting melody of that cursed music box. But at this very moment, driving down a country road, the Curtis family is approaching the secluded Alewood property. Those opening shots of the woods were additional photography filmed, I think, by either Godfrey Godar or Charles Wheeler. Hard to tell. And it was directed, I think, by Vincent McVitie, who was brought in to direct the updated final sequence. Okay. The one that we know today. The rest of the film, as we said, was directed by John Hugh, with cinematography by a man named Alan Hume, who had worked with Hugh previously on The Legend of Hell House. And he also did 28 episodes of The Avengers, Return of the Jedi, the James Bond films For Your Eyes Only and Octopussy, and 2 episodes of Tales from the Crypt, as well as many, many others. But while we're on the subject of visuals, and just about to arrive at the Alewood place, I thought we'd read an excerpt from an article from Horrified magazine, written by a British horror writer named Leroy Cross James. Visually, the movie's quite stunning. There's no denying the presence and influence of British horror in the production. British landscapes and exteriors play a part in developing the tone of the film, providing the eerie scenery and locations that only enhance the sense of dread to accompany the chilling music score. The score, composed, by the way, by Stanley Myers, who also did The Witches in 1990.
Okay.
The Alewood Manor alone embodies a standard Gothic environment, full of grand interiors, a large staircase, and the feeling of isolation that is expected in a traditional British horror tale. Not to mention how the seclusion of the house, thanks to the surrounding woods, only heightens the suspense and intrigue. Something that isn't uncommon in a vast majority of British horror films is the use of the towering, dark house or mansion. And that's my experience with British horror. I haven't seen a lot, but a couple of my favorite British horror films do use like the landscape, the dark, dreary, moody, rolling hills, the dark forest, these ancient buildings, these large houses.
Sure.
That is my experience with it.
Partially, I think, because they have the landscape to use. They have the history to draw on.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that we don't in America, but less so.
Right.
And only in certain places.
On the whole, these British visuals combined with the handheld POV trend of American slasher films is a lot of what makes the tone so jarring and unnerving in this movie.
I think this house will be exactly right for you.
Isn't it rather isolated?
Well, secluded, I'd say.
Well, showing this perfectly British Alewood property to the Curtises is Mrs. Thayer, a real estate agent who ends up providing much of the exposition we need very quickly. The woman who owns the house, Mrs. Alewood, lives next door in a cottage. She's been very particular about the sort of people who should live in the big old house, but someone needs to because she needs the income. And when Mrs. Thayer goes to get the keys from Mrs. Alewood at the cottage, she explains that Mrs. Curtis writes children's books, and Mr. Curtis is a talented musician who is in England to conduct his own opera. These details will come in handy later when the plot needs Mr. Curtis away on business and Mrs. Curtis too distracted with her writing to keep an eye on Ellie and her new puppy, Narek.
Also, this property was only being rented for $1,000 a month.
Are you sure you didn't say $1,000 a week?
Like, this house is more like castle status, like it is
it's huge.
A giant property.
Huge.
And this was in
lugubrious
1980, so imagine
yeah,
what that would be today.
Mrs. Thayer is played by Eleanor Summerfield, a British actress who, like Bette Davis, has been acting since the former half of the 20th century, with dozens of credits to her name, the last of which was an episode of Midsummer Murders. Long running British crime show.
I just know that she was super judgy as a character.
Yeah, she was quite
and they
snooty.
only wanted the right sort of people to be in the property.
She's a bit rude in the book, too. It's strange.
Very just judgmental.
Mrs. Thayer's role in the story is short-lived, ending just after she drops the heaviest of bombs in the car after Mrs. Alewood agrees to let the Curtises live there. She says, "Jan looks like Mrs. Alewood's daughter who went missing many years ago."
Lost how?
I really don't know all the details, just that she'd disappeared. I believe the circumstances were rather tragic.
You need the one person that's like, the house is haunted, right?
Yep.
Like I had when I moved into my house.
Yeah.
Yard guy. And it was a landscaper. It's always like the groundskeeper. It's always the person.
The groundskeeper knows everything.
It's always the person who lives close to the land.
Yep.
It's like, you're going to die in that house, don't you? Yeah, probably. And this is why Mrs. Alewood lets them live there. She was cold and obstinate until she laid eyes on Jan, hyperfixating on her, which she continues to do while the Curtises look around the house, just staring at Jan with wide eyes, making her and all of us incredibly uncomfortable. But it's the conversation they have in the upstairs bedroom that really seals the deal.
What sort of person are you?
It's hard to say, just average, I guess.
Is she adventurous, kind, and sensitive?
You sense things.
This awkward exchange ends with Mrs. Aylwood stating,
I'm going to take a chance on you.
This is all pretty similar to the book, but there are some distinct differences that I think are worth mentioning. For one, Mrs. Curtis isn't a writer. She's a homemaker. And Mr. Curtis isn't a musician, but a professor who has just accepted the position of head of the English department at a local college. And they don't move to England from America. They moved to Massachusetts from Ohio.
Oh, so it may have just been that they changed a profession based on their casting.
I think so.
We just know he had a very soft touch late at night.
Oh, the softest.
I have a very soft touch late at night.
And like Mrs. Curtis being a writer, I think that's just a nod to Florence Randall of like, she writes charming children's books. You know, it's like weaving in, you know, how things do.
Yeah.
And the reason Mrs. Aylwood doesn't want to sell the house is because she lives in it and has for almost 70 years. There is no cottage next door. And the whole point of her selling the house is so she can afford to live out the rest of her days in a nursing home in Boston. And if it was me, they'd be finding my rotting corpse in that house.
I know.
They're not taking me away from my haunted mansion
I know.
and putting me in a LED lit freaking nursing home with bad food.
It's so just that I think about these things way too often.
And when they buy the house, they're not renting. When they buy the house in the book, she moves into that nursing home.
Oh,
She's gone.
wait.
And she doesn't come back until the very end of the book.
Miss Aylwood is gone for the entire book.
Until the very end, yes.
Wow.
She has nothing to do with the plot until the very end.
Oh, wow. That's shocking to me.
But why do they keep her around in the movie?
Because of the casting.
Because Betty Davis.
Betty Davis
Exactly.
had to be there.
You get Betty Davis, you write her into that movie as much as you possibly
I
can.
get it. I understand. I get it. Like the Betty Davis casting decision
Yep.
changed the whole character for the film.
They talk about Mrs. Aylwood the entire book.
I'm glad they did because she's a defining element of the story. If you didn't have her, it changes the whole thing. So now I'm like, I'm just surprised because I'm like, I feel like the book doesn't have that like anchor because she's kind of the anchor of the plot.
That's the difference between plot and story. She is the driving force of the story, but not the plot.
Yeah.
They talk about her the whole time.
Right.
There's never really a moment where they're not focusing on either her or Karen.
She's present, but she's not present.
And in the book, what's the difference?
Yeah.
Because it's all in your head.
Sure.
The similarities between the two that are worth mentioning. Jan has the overwhelming sense that there's someone in the woods watching them. And the large Aylwood house is a Tudor home, which to her looks like a gingerbread house in the woods where a witch must certainly live.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, when the front door opens, voila, creepy Mrs. Aylwood, dressed all in black with wrinkly skin and swollen knuckles and the works.
You mean me now?
Yeah, you're such an old witchy woman.
I feel that way.
The next chapter opens after you meet her. The first line is, she was a witch. It's fun.
She was. This is certain.
If we come to live here, I'm gonna climb this, and then go exploring in those woods.
Well, don't forget to leave a trail of pebbles so I can track you down and grab you before the Wicked Witch eats you up.
If she lives in a gingerbread house, I'll eat it up. I'm starved.
So they just kind of threw that in there. But this is 3 Screams, 1 Skull. It references the book, it references Disney's history with reimagining fairy tales, and it hints at a dark presence waiting in the woods. The most significant similarity, however, is that Mrs. Aylwood once had a daughter named Karen, who, decades ago, completely vanished. But when it comes to that storyline, the similarities end there. In the movie, after Jan almost drowns in the pond in the woods, Mrs. Aylwood reveals to her that the night Karen went missing, she'd snuck out through her window.
Then I remember there was an eclipse that night. I thought she might have gone to watch it at the pond.
So she searched the woods, and arriving at the chapel, what she found was a mystery. After, quote-unquote, lightning catches the belfry on fire, 3 teenagers go scrambling through the churchyard. These kids are John Keller, Mary Pierce, and Tom Colley. More on them later. At some point afterward, these kids reveal that they were playing a game with Karen, in which she'd been blindfolded. But during the violent chaos that ensued, she disappeared. Her body was never found among the church ruins. And we learn later from Tom Colley that it wasn't just a game, but an occult ritual of initiation into their secret society. Not unlike the Midnight Society. considering she was blindfolded and had to prove herself worthy of the group through a test of courage.
That was my first thought because I was raised on Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yeah,
I was raised on these. This is a not uncommon occurrence. So I was like, what were they up to? What kind of weird initiation were they doing? And then lo and behold, we find that that's exactly what they were doing.
That's pretty much it. This whole thing backfired, however, because when the chapel caught fire and they ran off, Karen stood her ground, didn't show fear, speak, or remove the blindfold, proving herself more worthy than any of them. As Tom Cawley puts it, when he looked back, Karen was already gone. Now, I mentioned the Midnight Society here to show how similar this movie feels to an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, but also to give a little perspective. In the early 80s, this concept is a deep, dark, scary secret. After the 80s were darker than anybody could have anticipated, by the early 90s, we had a whole show dedicated to a secret society of teenagers who meet in the woods for a storytelling ritual with blindfolded initiation ceremonies and everything.
Yep. There we go. Like I said, I was raised on it. It was already in my consciousness when I saw this film.
There are many similarities.
They built it. It's like we were talking about with Ellie, with Kyle Richards.
Right.
She built the narrative or the idea of a child in horror media. They kind of built the idea of kids' mischief.
Just having fun, but in this like occult way.
It's a very early like fringes of that being depicted.
Yeah, it kind of would have been this almost unheard of thing. So it's really surprising, again, that Disney did this. That this was a Disney movie. Especially since this wasn't in the book.
It's interesting too, because being in 1980, it was like earliest ideas of this kind of thing happening in a teenage group of friends, but also pre like severe satanic panic.
Right.
So it didn't feel like they were crossing a lot of lines when they put it into a film. It's in such a weird middle place in time.
I did a bunch of research into that when I was doing our Demon in the Mattress episode for The Exorcist, because I was trying to figure out the timeline of the satanic panic. And the book that is kind of like given the credit of sparking the satanic panic is Michelle Remembers. And that came out in 1980.
Okay, yeah.
So like right before
like
this.
The brink of it.
Yeah, so it was all at the same time. But I bet you if this movie was supposed to come out a few years later, it never would have been made.
No, I don't think so.
Audiences would have thought it was way too dark and heavy.
Yep.
That's such an interesting perspective. And like looking at all this 80s versus the 90s, Midnight Society versus these kids in the woods, like this tells us that these kids, they're just bored teenagers.
Right.
So like a girl vanishing during this ritual is the stuff of nightmares. Like it's pretty freaking dark. Like, can you imagine that episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yeah. Where one of them just disappears. Because there were episodes when they played jokes on each other and they did,
Yeah.
They never took it too seriously, but this film does.
What if there was a feature where they're initiating a new person into the Midnight Society and they're blindfolded and they're trying to do the whole thing, but they get too scared and they run off into the woods and they just vanish.
Crazy.
And then they have to explain. What if they have to explain, but they can't tell anybody because they're the Midnight Society. It's a secret society.
It's all a secret, which is what happened in this film.
I mean, it would pretty much be this movie.
Yeah, that's the plot of this film.
But that's the version of this movie that I want DJ McHale to make. Like
Honestly.
I want to see his version of this movie.
That would be cool.
But having said all that, in the book, Karen's disappearance is much more disturbing and upsetting. The whole thing feels much more latchkeys and milk cartons than some game gone awry. It can be summed up in one sentence. One day, Karen went for a walk in the woods, and she was never seen again.
Yeah.
It was the morning of July 21st, 50 years ago. She'd left a note by the sugar bowl in the kitchen saying back soon. And that was the last anyone ever heard from her.
Much, much more milk carton.
Yeah.
I feel like if they had leaned into that energy, it would have been almost better received. Not better received, but like more of the time in the 80s, I think people would have related to it or seen it differently than they did. Like it, because it just didn't have anywhere to land. I think if they'd leaned into that energy, it would have been part of a whole group of media that was produced about that phenomenon.
I think it would have held up in time much, much better if they'd stuck with the original story instead of having to make it all fancy and sensational.
But that's what I was about to say. That's another moment where it's like, did Ron Miller shoot it in the foot? Because if they had leaned into the original story, it would have been much darker, more realistic, and more looking at the dark side of society.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this story could have landed better if they had gone with more of a true crime air.
I don't even think it would have been that darkness. I think he probably said, that's boring.
Yeah, maybe.
We need to make it more sensational.
Make it bigger.
Make it Disney. Make it big.
I could see that too.
And I think that's where I think that's what happened.
And little did he know, in how many years? In 40 years, people would be clamoring for true crime media.
That's true. That's true. So I just sent Kaylin a page from the book. This is a moment where Jan's walking with Mark. They just talked to Mark's mother about what happened years ago. And she's just sort of musing on putting herself in Karen's place.
So it's from her perspective. She's just imagining what had happened to Karen.
She likes to daydream. She likes to live in this fantasy world like everyone does, especially teenagers. So
just so you're clear, because I've never read what I'm about to read aloud to you now.
I'm excited. It's spooky season. Put on your spookiest.
I'm going to try.
Saddest.
Your
late sad girl summer vibe.
Sad girl summer vibes. Sad girl late summer vibes. That's my personality in a nutshell. I was born in freaking August. Okay. One July day, Karen Aylwood, aged 15, went for a walk in the woods. Maybe she wore a thin cotton dress and there were sandals on her bare feet. She wasn't afraid. She knew the forest. Like Mark, from the time she was a child, she had explored all the paths. Some of the trails she had blazed herself, the girl cutting notches in tree trunks, and perhaps that day she had picked up a fallen branch, stripping it of its leaves, twigs, and bark until she had a sturdy walking stick. It had been a hot day then, as hot as this one was now, as she went deeper and deeper into the woods. The air became so heavy, so close, she felt she couldn't breathe. Eagerly, she ran the rest of the way until she reached the haven of the pond. She made ripples of the water with her stick, bending over and smiling at herself. Karen mirrored in its surface. Did she splash her hands and wrists and the little pulse that beat at the base of her throat? Did she fall in, or did she wade deliberately, the cool mud bubbling between her toes? Karen Aylwood went for a walk in the woods, and no one had ever seen her again. Did she still walk in the shade of those rustling old trees? Did she leave a trail of wet footprints in the dead, dry leaves? Was she a drifting shadow staring with longing at her own house? 50 years ago, and she had been 15, a young girl just beginning, and what had happened to her? Had anyone bothered to search the pond? Had men come with grappling hooks dreading what they would find? Or had they just passed it by, the bloodhound sniffing, then pressing onward and the scent ending where?
God, it gives me chills.
Spooky.
It gives me freaking
I have goosebumps.
chills.
You can't see them, but I have them.
I do on my legs right now.
Yikes.
I don't know why. Every time I tried to read that myself, or I was pacing around my house like I do, drinking whiskey and talking to my cats, but like talking about the story and trying to wrap my head around what happened to Karen.
Yeah.
I actually got choked up a number of times.
Part of it...
It's upsetting to me.
It's upsetting to me too, and part of it is that we are children of the 90s. I know we harped on this last time, and I'm not trying to.
But we have the whole stranger danger angle.
Exactly.
We have the missing children angle.
This was pre that. So it's like this, again, was building that idea. So we're reading the origins of the stranger danger, like, mania.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That consumed our own childhood, that was already in the zeitgeist, that was already present in our parents and their parents.
Mm-hmm.
This is what put it there.
She was tapping into something that was about to be huge. I'm honestly surprised this wasn't a bigger book. I mean, there wasn't, I don't want to give too much away, but there wasn't some big reveal of like a person who did it.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's a whole sci-fi angle to this whole story. But everything for like 150 pages feels like a true crime, supernatural, haunting type story.
Wow.
Like what's the Lovely Bones?
The Lovely Bones.
That movie made me feel sick.
Me too. Oh, I was sick for like a week or two.
It's the most haunting thing I can imagine. This feels like that, but back in the mid-70s.
Yeah.
The truth, or the closest thing to a possible truth that the novel presents. There was no chapel, no eclipse, no other teenagers, no secret society. There was, however, a large oak tree in the meadow on the way to the pond where Karen loved to spend her summer days. The oak had a hollow in its trunk, a hole wide enough for a teenage girl to crawl inside of, if she wanted to. The best lead the search parties ever got was when the bloodhounds followed her scent to that oak tree, and that's where the trail went cold. The tree was searched, of course, but Karen's body was never found. Therefore, the staple thrill of this story is the idea that Karen is dead and is now haunting the property. I love a ghost story, and this is a pretty damn good one.
Yeah.
In the book, this supposed haunting manifests in a few simple ways. Jan's overwhelming sense of being watched. Ellie hearing things that nobody else can hear, such as a whispering through the open bedroom window one night that she should name her puppy Narek.
Narek.
A number of mirrors cracking into the shape of an X. That's right. Not a triangle.
Surprising.
Yeah.
I want to hear your theories on why it was a triangle in the movie.
Oh, I have a few. And the whole emphasis on mirrors is made extra spooky when Ellie starts writing down the things that she hears. But she writes all the letters backwards. This is a relatively common phenomenon in some children who are learning to write, and it's known as mirror writing. It can have negative connotations, such as a learning disorder, or dyslexia, gasp, or being left-handed, double gasp. But for the sake of the story, Ellie's mirror writing alarms Mr. Carstairs until they all get real cool about a bunch of stuff really quickly and accept as a family that she's transcribing messages from beyond.
Perfect. We all accept this.
It makes perfect sense.
On board.
It takes time, but they get there, the parents included.
At first, as you said that she heard the name Narek through the open window.
It's spooky.
That's spooky, and I kind of wish they'd done that in the film. But as you said that, I was assuming before you got to the rest of what your paragraph, I was assuming that they had just invented the mirror stuff for the film.
The mirrors in the book are only cracked.
Okay.
They don't ever show the image of Karen.
But does Ellie write on the mirror?
No, she writes in a drawing book.
But she writes backwards in the drawing book.
But everything is back. Yes. So it is backwards.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, that was in the book. They just adapted it for visual, because I was going to be impressed if they had just come up with all of that backwards writing, mirrored stuff on their own. So
that's part of the like mirror world imagery
right.
that they pulled from the book to use,
which I think is great. It's one of the redeeming
it's one of the better parts
pieces. Yeah.
People say that the shot of Narek being Karen backwards on the window. People said it was just like the most jump scare thing.
Yeah, it's red rum. I mean,
it's red rum, right?
It's red rum, but for teenagers.
Yeah.
A lot of people that have commented on us doing Watcher in the Woods, people that have commented on our socials, have said that they always write Narek when there's like steam on the window. Like condensation. I think that's cool.
It's a cool thing
because it just lasted, right? It's a very lasting visual. And the idea that you're getting these messages, or that Ellie is, but the idea that a child could get these messages from somewhere else, from the other side, if you will, or whatever the other side is, whether it's the spiritual other side or the other side of the mirror.
Yeah.
I think that is a really smart horror / drama existential trope. And that is something that we see in things like Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Oh, yeah.
In almost every episode.
Dude, speaking of, I mentioned wanting to see DJ McHale's version of this movie, but he kind of did when he did The Lonely Ghost in season 1, which we covered.
I thought of it so many times.
That was the first thing you and I said. We both watched it. We were like, it's The Lonely Ghost.
Yeah.
I am 100% convinced he based that episode off of the movie and the book.
I'm going to look up how old DJ McHale was when this came out. I'm just curious.
The obvious similarities of which are a spooky old house, an initiation ritual of sorts, a ghost girl stuck in a mirror writing the words "help me" on the walls, and the ghost girl's sad elderly mother who now lives next door and has to go into the mirror to be with her.
Right.
So yeah, there are a number of crossovers between this whole the canon story of this and DJ McHale too.
It's interesting. So I just looked it up for kicks and giggles. DJ was 25 when this came out.
Wow.
So it's kind of outside of the target audience, but it would have been around.
One of the biggest revelations in the book is that it isn't Karen haunting those woods. It's something else.
Not Karen outside there. Don't you understand? It's someone else.
And this is later confirmed by Mrs. Aylwood, who says she knows it isn't Karen because she can see it. She always has been able to since her husband died. And the movie muddles this a whole lot. But in the book, Mrs. Aylwood can see it, Ellie hears it, and Jan feels it.
Mm-hmm.
There's none of this like crossing over of different like senses.
Right.
It turns out the Watcher is telepathic. And those are the specific ways that these individuals are able to receive its transmissions.
Gotcha.
In the movie, the haunting isn't nearly as subtle. It manifests as flashes of blue light, gusts of strong wind, broken mirrors, audible humming, Ellie going into trances, and of course the apparition of Karen somehow actually haunting Jan.
Mm-hmm.
We learn at the end that Karen isn't dead. She's just stuck. Either Jan is peering into a parallel dimension through reflective surfaces, or the Watcher is manipulating Jan's perceived reality to get Jan's attention by telepathically projecting the image of Karen into a series of reflective surfaces, hinting that she is in said parallel dimension.
Which is pretty complicated.
Pretty complicated, but that seems to be the truest thing. Or this is Karen's Wraith. Remember the Wraith?
Yes, from our Halloween.
Yeah, Halloween series. The apparition of someone who is not dead.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let's see. Gooseneck lamp up here with the rest of my writing things. Mirror in the living room, please.
The first time we see Karen is on moving day, when Jan takes a mirror into the living room. At first, she can't see her own reflection. Pretty spooky stuff.
Very Are You Afraid of the Dark?
And then suddenly, a crack in the shape of a triangle forms at the center of the mirror. Inside the triangle is the spectral image of Karen, a blindfolded girl dressed all in white, seemingly asking for help. The crack inexplicably spiderwebs out, the mirror falls dramatically over, and shatters on the floor.
Jen, you didn't. I don't know what happened. I wasn't even touching it.
One of the better scenes, honestly.
It really was pretty good. But like, freaking weirdo, Mr. Curtis, when Jan tries to explain that she saw someone else in the mirror, he says,
You know how old mirrors are?
yeah, like, sure, Dad, I see dead people in mirrors all the time.
Yeah,
that's like no big deal.
It's just an old mirror.
It's just old mirrors.
Trick of the light.
TV Tropes calls this the supernatural proof father.
Maybe there's a ghost.
Yeah, what self-respecting old English house would be without one?
It's you as a dad.
It might be me. But they have no idea what to do with this character at all. Which speaks to why they send him off to London to get him out of the movie and gone.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't add anything except for these like weird, odd platitudes.
And
Just
yeah,
like,
a platitude such as...
I have a very soft touch. Late at night.
that's a non sequitur.
I can't get over that. Yeah, that's a non sequitur.
That's a non sequitur.
I can't get over that line. I really can't. I know I brought it up last time, but it's like, it was so...
It's worth bringing up twice.
It was such a strange... He's playing the piano. We said this last time, but it is such a strange thing for him to say.
Yeah, it is.
It just is. Okay, he's playing the piano. Okay, he has a soft touch on the piano late at night, whatever.
Yeah, he's talking about playing in like jazz clubs and stuff.
It was a weird order of words to come out of his mouth. That's all I'm saying.
And I love how they're all like smiling about it.
Yeah, they're all like, yeah, you do.
That's Dad.
Dad does have a soft touch late at night.
He does have a soft touch late at night.
Jesus.
You know what? Now that you mention it, he does.
Right.
Daddy
I hate it.
does have a soft touch.
I hate it so much. And it really bothered me deeply.
That's why he's not worried about ghosts, because ghosts come at night. And they're more afraid of his soft touch than he is of them.
That's how he scares them off.
He's scared many a ghost. Another time we see Karen is when Jan visits the chapel. Mike takes her and Ellie horseback riding, which is so random. When the Watcher spooks the horses, or possesses them, and Jan's horse runs to the chapel in the woods, it throws her from its back. Inside the chapel, a reflection of a light in the shape of a triangle leads Jan to an old coffin, where she looks inside and sees the apparition of Karen, blindfolded, but lying still as though dead.
Yeah, scary.
This is explained away by Mike, who points out the water in the coffin, claiming that Jan just saw her own reflection.
It's only a reflection.
Mike, it couldn't have been my reflection. I wasn't standing here. I was back there. It was Karen. Her image. She was lying in that coffin as if she were dead.
How dumb do you think I am, dude?
Yeah, oh my God. You just saw your own reflection.
Mansplaining a haunting.
Yeah. I mean, that comes from the book when he's trying to like logically reason out things, but there's also not an overt haunting.
Yeah.
Like, she's not going, I just saw Karen. Like, in the book, it's way more subtle. Spooky moment, though. People say also that's one of the most unnerving moments when they were kids was the coffin.
Before we did get to the coffin, though, one of the scenes that scared me the most as I watched it, because as you're watching it in real time, you don't know that Mrs. Aylwood isn't the bad guy, right? Like, it's a lot of suspicion about who's the bad guy, and you can't follow, you're trying to follow each thread to figure out, is this character trustworthy or not?
Right.
And they all seem like they're not at first, especially Mrs. Aylwood, and especially because of the scene at the pond. Because when Jan falls in, she's underwater for an extended period of time. And from our perspective, watching from the camera, what we see is that Mrs. Aylwood is drowning her, actively pushing her down into the water.
But she also just shows up out of nowhere, too.
Yeah, she just appears, which is already pretty spooky. Like, were you watching us?
Right.
Which, probably yes. But Ellie standing there trying to get Mrs. Aylwood to stop drowning her sister, and the scene goes on for so long. It lasts a long time, yeah. It lasts forever. But when I was watching it, I was like, there's no other explanation. She's pushing her into the pond. She's drowning her. And we learn when she gets her out and cleans her up, whatever, this is when she becomes more of a friend, because we realize that she was trying to get her unhooked from the branch or whatever to save her. But like, right. That's another thing that people tell us, that visual of this woman pushing Jan down into the pond stuck with them. And if I had seen that as a kid, that would have been rough for me.
I know.
It felt so malicious.
Yeah, talk about stranger danger.
Right?
We barely know this person.
We barely know this woman. We're already pretty wary of her.
She just followed us into the woods, and now she's trying to drown us.
And then as I was watching it, from my adult eyes, but as I was watching it, I was like, wait, did she kill Karen?
Right, of course.
Did she just go crazy? Like, that was, the path that my thoughts wanted to go down. So, yeah, another one of those moments that just sticks with you.
Oh, yeah.
Visually.
For a while there, the Watcher could be anyone.
Right. And approaching it, if you don't know much about it, which we've already kind of messed that up for you, listener, but if you're approaching it and you don't know much about it, you are assuming that your goal as a viewer is to deduce who the Watcher is as you go through it. Like, it's a whodunit, sort of. So you're always looking out for clues of, well, are they the Watcher? Are they the Watcher? Are they the Watcher? And then it slowly becomes apparent that, in fact, none of them are.
In the chapel is where we also get the first hint that Karen's disappearance had something to do with the eclipse. When a stained glass window shatters in this gust of wind, it sends these two rolling circles of glass, I think, to a stop. And they fall on top of each other, appearing like an eclipse. And of course, this is when Jan is chased out by Tom Colley, but we will get to him in a bit. I think my favorite appearance of Karen is in the Funhouse of Mirrors.
Yeah.
With 1,000 blindfolded Karens reaching out to Jan, silently screaming, "Help me," over and over and over. But I think I love this the most because it feels the most like Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I was going to say the same. This carnival date. Mike's like, yeah, let's get your mind off of everything. AKA, he's got his mind on something else.
Oh, yeah.
And wants to take her on a date to the carnival.
Works every time.
Yeah, well, maybe not this time.
Like, I fully expected a close-up Dutch angle of Jan screaming to take us to commercial.
At the carnival is also when I got frustrated with the movie because they say something about we should bring it to Ellie to curb her appetite or something. Like, they're making like weight jokes about a child, which they do throughout the film.
They do talk about her eating a lot.
They talk about her eating a lot. And it's just like, just because she's a young girl, and I mean, we just didn't even know yet the effect this was going to have on generations of young women, not just in this film, but like in media in general.
It's so weird.
That bugged me. I was like, but they didn't need it. It was always just the comic relief. It was always the throwaway, but it didn't need it. And it was still there.
Seeing Karen's wraith everywhere is hella fun, even if it isn't in the novel. And although it's never fully explained how or why she appears, it still makes more sense than a few other eerie moments in the movie. I don't have 3 sections like you usually do, but I did give this section a title, When Darkness Comes at Noon.
When darkness comes at noon.
Eclipse.
It's almost time.
Another quote from the Vulture article, "The uncanny thing is that the movie does happen to be genuinely disturbing in many ways. not least for its odd composition and the haphazard, hapless ways in which various plot lines veer off or are dropped as the story deems necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the oddest moments seem to be from a different movie entirely.
Yeah.
And for example, the dirt bike race.
This was like Disney Channel movie.
Yes, it
Like,
was.
let's go to a dirt bike race now.
What can we do to give the movie some energy? Dirt bike.
One of their kids must have been into dirt biking or something.
It must have been a thing. Yeah, I don't know. The Curtises go see Mark race his dirt bike. No, is it Mike? Do they call him Mike?
Mike.
In the book, he's Mark. I've been calling him Mark the whole time.
I couldn't have. It's been a minute since I watched it, but I have Mike in my notes.
Oh my God. Yeah, well, my bad, listener. Can't fix everything I've said so far.
Mike.
All right. See what I mean? See what I mean by all of them converging in my mind?
But it's also funny because I didn't even correct you because I was like, yeah, sure, he's a Mark. That's fine.
Yeah, well, in the book, he's Mark. Okay. Yeah, because I remember because I just saw the helmet where it says Mike.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, my half photographic memory,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's Mike instead.
His name's Mike.
In some inexplicable display of precognition, Ellie calls Jan away from a spot where seconds later, a dirt bike crashes and explodes. We know that ultimately the Watcher is protecting Jan, but this is one of the few instances where it seems like the Watcher is trying to harm her. Another being when she's lured to the pond
There you go.
by another symbol of the eclipse before being frightened by a flash of blue light that knocks her over into the water, and it seems like Mrs. Aylwood is trying to drown her,
Right.
when in fact she's trying to save her.
It is interesting because, yes, the perspective that we take in the film each time makes it seem like the Watcher is malevolent or has some ill intention, when in reality, the Watcher is looking out for her through these other people.
Right.
Like you said, like it turns that on its head. And honestly, it's a really nice, like, I think it's done well. I think that is done well.
Yeah.
Because I believed it to be malicious both times.
Another moment is when Mrs. Curtis is trying to take Jan and Ellie away from the property in a classic flee the haunted house in the middle of the night sequence.
Yeah.
The car stops on the bridge and they have to escape before the Watcher blasts the bridge and destroys the car in a cliffside explosion. It wasn't trying to harm them, it just wanted to eliminate their only means of escape.
One thing I do know is that seemed like a hell of a stunt. They had several stunts where I was like,
dude,
damn, they put a lot of money into that.
They loved car explosions.
Yeah, and most of it was practical, you know? They just were let's blow something up.
Oh, yeah.
You know? Let's just try.
And like all these guys worked on like British crime and like spy shows. So they had airplanes and cars and all kinds of stuff blowing up all the time.
They didn't feel at home unless they blew up a car on this set, I guess.
They were like James Bond era people. Everything had to be huge.
You can see that. That definitely carries through.
But when it comes to inexplicable plot devices, the music box really takes the cake.
This belonged to my daughter. It's the same tune you heard at the pond. Listen.
Horror cinema loves a music box, and I do too. That juxtaposition between the innocent music and the underlying darkness it attempts to conceal is rarely anything short of terrifying. But when it comes to the Watcher in the Woods, the music box is nothing more than a horror trope for the sake of horror tropes. My reasoning is, if Karen's ghost were attached to the music box, I'm sold. If a dark entity pretending to be Karen's ghost were attached to the music box, even better. Now we're in the Conjuring universe.
Yeah.
But Karen isn't dead, and the Watcher isn't pretending to be her. So it really only works in this story because the script says it does.
Well, I get the idea that she's somewhere else.
Yeah.
She's not dead, but she is somewhere else. So she's affecting things or haunting things from somewhere else.
Oh, see, my takeaway is she's not able to do any of that. She's not manipulating anything at all.
I mean, she probably isn't, but the Watcher is.
But it wouldn't know to use the music box.
Maybe it would. Maybe it's all knowing.
I don't know. It's like I said, it's an anything goes situation. They're not trying to make logic of any of this.
No.
They're just doing whatever works for the story, for the plot.
And looks cool.
And it looks cool and it's scary as hell. Because the music box entrances Ellie, right? And something begins speaking through her.
Karen. Must help Karen.
And we learn two things. The Watcher in the Woods is not Karen, it's something else.
No! Not Karen! Stupid, stupid, stupid!
And two, the Watcher doesn't just speak to Ellie, but it can and will possess her when it needs to, tying back in The Exorcist.
Door. Must open door.
What door? Where?
Chapel. Soon. Very soon. Help Karen very soon.
You mentioned a couple of them, but in like the last, 20 or 30 minutes of the movie, we get just a series of horror movie tropes.
Yeah.
We have when the car shorts out on the bridge, when the phones stop working, and then, of course, when Ellie is possessed as well.
Yeah, sure.
All of these are just like classic, like we said, classic horror moments that they're pulling and just sprinkling in wherever they can make them fit, whether they make sense or not.
Big ol' hodgepodge.
A collage.
It's a potluck.
It's potluck. It's all of those things.
Potluck of horror tropes. That sounds like such a southern.
What are you bringing?
I like to flee the haunted house.
I'm bringing the phone short circuiting.
Honorable mentions of inexplicable eeriness. The circles and the triangles.
I see, okay.
Which TV tropes calls arc symbols, or symbols that have a hidden significance within the story.
Mm-hmm.
The circles, as we know, represent the eclipse. The triangles are a bit more cryptic. I mostly point this out because in the book, as I've said, every time a mirror cracks, it cracks in the shape of a jagged X.
Mm-hmm.
But the movie changed it to a sideways triangle. As far as I could tell, the X was meant to symbolize 4 equal parts, which represent the 4 members of the Carstairs family, which parallel 4 characters from the previous generation. Mr. Curtis is Mr. Aylwood. Both are tall and had a habit of bumping their heads on the low ceiling at the top of the stairs. Mrs. Curtis is Mrs. Aylwood. Both dreamed of children bringing life and laughter into the house and enjoying crackling fires on cold winter mornings. Jan equals Karen. Both are 15 and in danger of going missing in the woods. And Ellie equals the Watcher. I'll explain this later.
Okay.
But both are children with much to learn.
Okay.
My guess is the triangle is one of two things. Either it represents something seen in the famously omitted scene known as the Otherworld sequence, in which there's a pyramidal prism of light in which Karen is stuck.
Yes.
The reason I'm skeptical of this is because that's clearly an upright pyramid and the triangle that we see is a sideways triangle.
He's doing the hand motions here too.
I'm doing, for
it's
visual.
like the YMCA up in here.
Yeah. These two symbols don't match. I went back and I watched it again because I was like, that's probably it. But they don't even look even kind of similar. So I think it has more to do with the circle of friendship formed in the chapel by John, Mary, and Tom around Karen. It could be argued that these 3 teenagers don't form much of a circle, but they do make up the 3 points of a triangle. That's what I think. You're not as impressed as I wanted you to be, but
no, that's
what I think.
I'm just coming online to the idea. It wasn't something that I considered really at all. But yeah, they're 3 points. I just always, even though Karen was in the middle, I included Karen in the group in my head, so I wouldn't have gone there. But you're right.
It could be just telling Jan that to do it again, the 3 of them have to link hands. 1, 2, 3.
You're right. 3 points of a triangle.
The main reason I think the film deviated so much from the book is for sensational cinematic reasons. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. I forget where I read it, but one article said that the ritual in the chapel feels right at home in a John Hughes directed Hammer horror film. The whole seance, they call it, in the chapel is much more exciting than a hole in a tree. But the concept of someone disappearing through a hole in a tree is so much more scary to me. It's so much scarier.
Because there is the natural, things we don't understand about the natural world.
It feels like the fairies.
Yeah, kind of.
You wander into the woods, you enter a fairy ring, and they take you to the fairy realm.
They take you, yeah.
It feels like that.
I think adding the belfry, adding the church, gave it a weirdly religious twist, which was probably on trend at the time to be scarier or
Probably.
I was going to say the word supernatural, but it's, you know what I mean? Like it tied in that spooky supernatural versus.
Just because we weren't yet to the satanic panic, not quite, doesn't mean that the world didn't already have a long history with spiritualism.
Right.
And like seances and all this, which is why they call it a seance. It isn't, because they're trying to call upon, what is it? This, forces of the universe or something.
Yeah.
So maybe it's like a low-key Disney seance of some kind.
But
it's not my friends on the other side.
Right. No.
That's way darker.
Yeah. It just lives in such a, like we kept saying, it has its hand in so many things. It doesn't commit to any of them.
Right.
So it leads to your ghost host sitting here being like, where do we put it? Where do we put it? I don't know.
I'm telling you, it's that schizophrenic nature of it that's just so creepy.
Yeah, it's very splintered. It's very...
It's splintered, but it has no allegiance to any one thing. Like, it's just... I don't know. It's rogue.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's Disney's disturbed child. Like, it is just the one you want to not think too much about.
Yep. Send it off to pasture.
But something about like a hole in a tree, it feels so much more Disney at the same time.
Yeah.
Nancy does this in Stranger Things, and it's super haunting. Mm-hmm. But like Jack Skellington also does this in Nightmare Before Christmas.
Nightmare Before Christmas. That's what I think.
And it's super magical.
Yeah.
And he falls through the tree and goes to Christmas land. So like it's scary when done right, but it's still whimsical enough for Disney. Mm-hmm. So I'm still just shocked that they didn't go with the tree thing.
It may have been just like a lot of these other decisions were made by the casting choices. It may have been a location choice where it was like when they scouted a location, when they were figuring out, I'm sure that they had their script in hand at that time. But if they had that cool church location.
Oh, that's a soundstage.
Chapel location. Well, inside is, but they had external shots of it
true.
too.
Yeah.
In fact, they had quite a lot of external shots of it, or at least 2 scenes.
That's true.
So if they saw that and they said, I like the look of that goes with the house, that goes with the vibe of the movie, that may have dictated that they do the seance inside the church.
Could be. You're right.
We may be thinking too hard about all of it because it's thus far, especially with the casting decisions, it was all just very practical changes to what was in front of them,
Let's get Ron Miller on the horn. I want to ask him some questions.
Somebody call him up.
Maybe Scott Bosco will talk to us.
I bet he would.
And speaking of this seance and these 3 teenagers, Mark's mother, Mary, is in the book, but we only know
Mike's mother.
God,
Mary.
You're right. Mike's mother, Mike/Mark's mother, Mary.
Mike, Mark, and Mary.
Mike/Mark's mother, Mary, John Jacob Jingleheimer Smith, is in the book, but we only know her as Mary Fleming. She tells Jan that Karen probably ran away from home, but that was 50 years ago. Before Mary was even born, so she doesn't know. Mm-hmm. So the movie corrected this age gap by saying it was only 30 years ago, when Mary Fleming was still Mary Pierce, a teenager.
Yes.
And in the movie, Mary is nervous, evasive, and clearly has a dark secret to keep.
We were just larking about. It was just a game.
Right. Because it's the story she's had to tell herself all these years.
Right.
To feel okay.
She's played by Frances Cuca, a British actress who began acting for the stage in the 1950s and then moved to film and TV in the 1960s. She played Lucy Stell in a 1970s TV series of Sense and Sensibility.
Nice.
Ethel Cratchit in a 1970 film called Scrooge.
Hey.
And Mrs. Bedwin in the 2005 Oliver Twist.
We like Oliver Twist around here too.
It's a good movie. Mm-hmm. Then we have the unlikely duo that is John Keller and Tom Colley, whom the Vulture article describes as aggressor and lackey, respectively.
That is how they read.
They don't appear in the novel at all.
Oh, okay.
They're total inventions. So why go Keller and Colley? Why make them so similar if you're just inventing...
We're already so confused.
John, Tom, Keller, Colley. They couldn't get any more creative than that? Are you kidding me?
When I was watching it, I multiple times was like, wait, which one's John? Okay, that's John.
Because they're British and they don't emphasize their R's. So it's Keller and Colley.
Keller.
Tom Colley, as we've said, is the one who reveals the whole truth about Karen's disappearance. It wasn't just a game, but an occult initiation into a secret society. Mm-hmm. Tom is depicted as a simpleton and an alcoholic, but also at first kind of a creep.
Major creep.
Major creep.
Major creep.
Major creep. We see him lurking in the woods, seemingly watching Ellie play with her puppy.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when he catches Jan alone in the chapel, he chases her out and corners her until he's frightened away by Mike. I wrote Mike that time.
Nice.
And the horses. Then we're led to believe that he follows Jan through the woods back to his own house, a dilapidated hunting lodge or something like that, and he corners Jan again and touches her hair.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so delicately.
Yeah.
But this is to prove to himself that she's not
That
Karen's
she's real.
ghost.
Right.
Because she looks just so much like Karen, apparently.
But it's just another attempt to make us suspicious of this character and then to absolve that character. So it's just
more red herrings.
Set up, knock it down. Set it up, knock it down.
And knock them down.
Over and over.
I mean, it's insinuating that he might have a nasty habit of harming young girls until we quickly learn that he's actually gentle and just misunderstood.
Boo Radley.
He and Karen were friends.
Loved Karen. Wouldn't ever hurt her.
My guess is when Karen disappeared, something in his mind broke.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been drinking himself to death all these years to mask the fear and the guilt he feels over Karen's disappearance.
That's how I took it.
He blames himself. I mean,
and that's also why when they try to pin him as that creepy character, he doesn't really resist it because he's almost like,
it was my fault.
Yeah, I deserve it. I'm at fault. I've lived all these years in guilt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he definitely takes it on a lot more than the other two.
It's definitely messed him up big time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's the one who saw her vanish, so yeah.
That'll stick with you.
Mm-hmm. But again, to play up this crusty caretaker trope for trope's sake, they give him some pretty ominous and off-putting dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Like there with Jan, he reveals that he cares for injured animals. But then he points out a few dead birds and rodents hanging upside down by strings, and he says,
"When I finds them like that, dead, I buries them."
Which, no, you don't. They're hanging up by strings in your house. Like,
yeah. Part of your process, I guess.
But one of the most ominous lines comes when he pays John Keller a visit. He swears he's seen Karen's ghost. And the guilt-ridden, John Keller dismisses him entirely. Pretty suspicious character. Mm-hmm. But that's when Tom says,
"What was it I seen then? Has she come back from the grave to haunt us for what we done, Mr. Keller? Is it the ghost of Karen I seen?"
For what we've done.
Yeah, for what we've done. But then cue that jump scare at the fun fair with the mechanical scream, the puppet, the witch puppet on the ghost train.
Jump scare at the fun fair.
It's a good name for like an album.
It's a good name for like a Goosebumps book.
Yeah, it is. Ooh. Tom is played by Richard Pascoe, another British actor who had dozens of roles in British TV series and movies. Notable ones for me are Cardinal Richelieu in a 1960s series of The Three Musketeers. He was some guy named Dr. Boris Zargo in a 1966 movie about Rasputin, starring Christopher Lee as Rasputin.
Whoa.
I've got to see this movie.
Yeah, where is that living now?
Probably on Amazon Prime.
Not sponsored.
Nope. And John Keller is played by Ian Bannon, a Scottish actor with another set of dozens of credits throughout his career. He played the leper in Braveheart and won the 1999 Golden Satellite Award for Best Actor for his role of Jackie O'Shea in Walking Ned Divine, the same year he died in a car accident.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Damn.
And speaking of John Keller, the Vulture article says, Keller lives in an even more lugubrious mansion than Jan's house and seems to do nothing but brood by a gigantic fire.
I have in my notes, you wanted John Keller's fireplace.
Hashtag goals, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need a big fireplace in my future. I gotta have a walk-in fireplace. Not for walking into.
Yours right now is pretty good.
Mine's good. I just painted it black.
You did.
It looks great.
I know. Literally, whenever I saw him sitting next to his fireplace all those times, I was like, this is what you want your life to be.
I'm not going to say last winter I didn't sit right in front of my fire with a whiskey and stare into it for a couple hours.
You did.
I'm not going to say I didn't do that.
I'm certain.
But this mansion deserves its lugubrious scowl because it is none other than the same structure used in the 1963 The Haunting.
Hey!
Robert Wise's incredible adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House. John Keller's house is Hill House.
No way!
Yeah. I'm so jealous.
No way.
And it's located in Eddington Park, Warwickshire.
Oh my God.
I love that movie and I want to visit Eddington Park.
You had me watch that movie. We watched that at your house together.
Yes, I sat you down and I said, look at this screen, stop talking and watch this movie.
You did. You're like, shut up, sit down, watch this movie.
No, yeah. Pretty jealous. So I don't just want his fireplace. I want his haunted house.
I want the whole thing. Yeah.
Moody old John Keller lives in a moody old mansion. This tells us that John Keller is moody old money.
It was John Keller's idea.
We had blindfolded Karen. That was what John Keller had told us to do.
My big takeaway, hot take, is that John Keller was a bored rich kid, wanting to rebel against his own posh ways and dabble in a bit of the occult with some quote-unquote friends from town that he could boss around, control, manipulate, yada, yada, yada. He didn't mean any real harm, but he was the piece of shit who planned the whole thing and then refused to take responsibility for 30 years. He had Tom and Mary blindfold Karen and bring her to the secret meeting place, the chapel, where he was already waiting for them. And then he makes Karen stand on the coffin and he says,
Karen Aylward, you have been brought to this place to prove yourself worthy of our secret society. We number only 3. We 3 alone have passed this test of courage. Many have tried and failed. But we link hands. You must not show fear. You must not speak. You must not remove the blindfold. You must not move at all. We shall hold hands around you, and you must not break our circle. The circle of our friendship. Whatever happens, whatever we say or do, you must abide by our code and banish all thoughts from your mind.
Very culty.
It's very culty.
That's pretty culty.
That's pretty seance. And when they join hands around her, which Tom calls ring around the rosy.
Yeah.
We ask the question, is this person worthy?
And that's when the lightning struck the belfry and started the fire. Lightning started the fire.
I sang the
was
same
burning.
thing.
I don't know the words.
Ryan started the fire.
I would say we all know Ryan started the fire.
Yeah, Ryan started the fire.
Screw the blue beam of lightning that's not lightning.
Watcher started the
Yes. Watcher did. You know what? Ryan absolved.
What's Watcher's fault?
It's okay. To me, their transgression as a group against Karen wasn't having some spooky fun. It was leaving her behind, blindfold.
For sure.
While the church began to burn.
Which, yeah, if this just went a slightly different way, it would have been a crime they all committed years ago.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I don't know if you could charge somebody for that crime, but like abandoning someone blindfolded in a burning building seems like at least...
It's manslaughter.
Manslaughter. That's what I was about to say. It's at least manslaughter.
There's involuntary manslaughter, and then like the next step up is negligent homicide. If they'd been tried as adults because they were 16 going on 17.
They were 16
going on murderers. It would have been negligent homicide.
Damn. Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. Like this, if this were a true crime story and we just find that these teenagers made a bad call.
And that's what I fully expected to happen.
I know.
And then it became something else entirely.
Yeah.
But to me, this whole like the girl up on the pedestal in a burning structure
church
feels like it was pulled directly from Carrie, which came out in 1976.
It's just another example of them cherry picking some horror moments that they wanted to reenact or like repurpose.
So now that Jan knows exactly what happened to Karen, all the pieces start to make sense thanks to one super creepy scene where Ellie is mirror writing on the bathroom mirror with a bar of soap.
Yes.
The backwards words say, "Do again tomorrow."
Yeah.
And in her trance, Ellie mumbles,
"Nearly too late. Hardly ever happens."
Nearly too late. Hardly ever happens.
Ellie said it hardly ever happens. What does it mean?
I don't know, Jan. I can't remember.
Next day, talking about the eclipse, she says it's nearly too late, and it hardly ever happens. And of course, there's the paper snowflake cutout of the ring around the rosy for good measure.
Oh, rats. When Mike did this, it came out elephants. Not ring around the rosy.
So this all tells Jan what she's got to do. Recreate the seance with John, Mary, and Tom at the exact moment of the solar eclipse. Jan herself would act as the conduit, the portal, through which Karen would be able to return. And if that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, it's because it doesn't.
You're not alone.
Necessarily.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
We've been all over the place today. People are like, what movie? What?
Yeah.
That's how the movie is.
Mr. Keller, I have to know exactly what you said and did that night.
I told Karen.
To me, Mr. Keller, I'm Karen now. Say it to me.
Very well.
Once everyone is there and everything is going according to plan, Ellie is then possessed by the Watcher, and for no reason, really at all, except to put their money where their mouth is and complete the supernatural circle where it began, with the Exorcist.
Merrick.
And somehow this wasn't the natural first conclusion intended by the filmmakers. It wasn't even the second. And if you believe the urban legend that the original ending was so terrifying and disturbing that Disney destroyed the film, then it wasn't even the third conclusion, but the fourth.
Whoa.
But no matter how many endings were filmed, the reason that this one, the official ending, still makes no sense to me is because all the Watcher accomplishes in possessing Ellie and entering the chapel.
The question, is this person worthy?
Listen. Ready to return. I've been trapped on your planet. Karen in my dimension. We exchanged places by mistake. Magnetic pull of the eclipse. Transferred our positions. Now exchange places again.
All that accomplishes is to frighten these broken humans so much that they almost can't complete the ritual. But of course they do succeed. And we get our Disney happily ever after.
Ish.
The Watcher is gone, and Karen returns to be reunited with Mrs. Aylwood, who conveniently shows up out of nowhere, not for the first time.
Karen. You're home.
And basically, my takeaway, I don't know if this was the intended takeaway, but my takeaway was that all those years ago, in the moment that this happened, the Watcher and Karen just swapped places.
Yeah.
Karen went to the Watcher's world, and the Watcher came to Karen's. Why? Why? What? Why? Like, what?
Because of the magnetic pull of the eclipse. Don't you get it?
Yeah, okay. The magnetic
Because they
pull.
performed an occult ritual, a seance that somehow the veil was thin between the
was
worlds.
thin and they just went smash.
And they held a
together.
seance at the exact moment of the eclipse when it was at its thinnest, which
But
I don't know if that's what eclipses are.
Were the Watcher's friends on the other side in the belfry of the Watcher's world, whatever the equivalent is, they don't have hands, so whatever they were holding, were they standing in a circle doing their own occult ritual, teenage mischief night in the Watcher's world to then swap them?
These are the reasons why this ending is unsatisfactory. Why I'm not happy about it. You're asking the right questions and you're on the mark for the book.
Oh, okay.
You're thinking in the way that it was intended to be from the very beginning in the novel.
Oh, no way.
Why it doesn't work is because this is the third ending that they tried to make work.
The ending that, is present today.
That everyone sees.
Right.
The problem is the entire movie up to this point was playing toward another angle entirely.
Yeah.
So then they said, you know what? Let's just use what we have, make it kind of the most minimal amount, tie back in, and then we'll have our official ending.
Bada bing, bada boom.
These are different endings altogether. The reason we needed this frightening display of exposition here at the very end is because the previous versions of the film's conclusion left critics and audiences totally confused and underwhelmed and disappointed. As we discussed in part 1, the theatrical release of the original version was rushed due to Ron Miller's desire to premiere the film for Bette Davis's 50th film anniversary, thus resulting in uncompleted animation. For certain reasons that I'll explain, this original version of the film takes a sharp turn toward the extraterrestrial. The reveal of the Watcher in the chapel had nothing to do with possessing Ellie at all.
Yeah.
She's not even there. Instead, a giant insectoid alien thing appears in the chapel, wraps Jan up in its wings, and teleports her out of the chapel.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's one you can find.
This is on YouTube. You can watch this whole thing. It's also on the DVD extras.
Ah, okay. We need to label these endings. The one we just spoke about previously was the one that's in everything currently.
It's the official one. Yeah, the one that you see when you watch the movie.
This one, what would you call this? Alternate one?
No, this was the original ending.
Okay, original ending.
Yes.
This was the first one that everybody saw and they all hated.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll say here, there were a few designers for the alien, but one of notable mention was my man Henry Selick, who directed The Nightmare Before Christmas and Coraline.
Hey, I was like, I know that name.
But here in this original version, while the Watcher and Jan are gone, Mrs. Curtis arrives at the chapel and begs everyone to tell her what happened to Jan. That's when Jan is returned, just all of a sudden, bringing Karen with her.
Yes.
She walks Karen home and she's reunited with Mrs. Aylwood.
Yes.
And Jan quickly explains that Karen was stuck in time and space, in another world where people are turned into negative images. There was an accidental exchange between the Watcher and Karen, so the Watcher needed Jan's image to set Karen free, so the Watcher could also return home. Again, if that doesn't make any sense, it's because it doesn't.
Because I'm like, well, who was the image of the Watcher on the
on this side,
positive side?
I know.
I don't know. I will give a lot of grace and I will suspend a lot of disbelief. As you guys know, you've heard what we've been doing this for almost 2 years now, and you've heard me give grace to a lot of things. I have a hard time here.
23 months of this, and this is the first time we've been like,
well.
What do you mean?
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
What do you mean?
Yeah, then the sad. What do you mean?
This is because this ending is missing two key elements. One from the movie's incomplete production, and the other from the novel. And I'm going to freaking blow your mind with that shit. I can't wait.
We've arrived.
So this is the original and not intended, but the original ending that premiered in 1980, the rushed version, right?
Was with the wings and the alien bug.
Yes. There's a whole sequence of animation that you're missing here. It's famously omitted for this movie, and it's known as the Otherworld sequence. This is what was intended by the filmmakers, at least at some point before production wrapped, to tie in all the details of the story to make the movie make sense.
And it ended up not being made because of the rush on production.
Right.
Post-production, really.
This is where the Watcher takes Jan when they teleport out of the chapel. They go to the Watcher's spaceship.
Oh.
Spaceship, where Karen is stuck in this pyramidal prism of light that I'm going to call an energy field that, let's say, powers the spacecraft. To paraphrase the visual effects supervisor, Sam Nicholson, when Karen disappeared 30 years ago and ended up on this spacecraft, her weight imbalanced it, causing the alien to crash. Therefore, the alien needed Jan to come remove Karen from the spacecraft so it could take off again and return home. When the... yes, just hold that thought and that tone for the rest of this episode. We're all meditating. Deep breaths, everybody. When the release of this film was rushed, the Otherworld sequence was omitted, and the animation of the alien wasn't completed, resulting in a clunky animatronic that John Hughes has made very clear he had no say in the design or animation of, stating, "The last 4 minutes undid all the good work of the previous 87 minutes when the monster came out."
Yes.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, for sure.
Although, I don't think the animation would have made it any better.
I agree.
In fact, perhaps it would have made it worse.
Maybe. I've also seen the Otherworld sequence. It's not that bad.
No, I thought it didn't get made.
No, there was an uncompleted version of it. The animation wasn't completed. It's the alternate ending number 2 on the DVD extras.
I don't like it.
It just looks like 70s animation.
I don't like the idea of it.
Cheap, horrible.
We say this all the time. Don't show us the monster. When you show us the monster, it's all over.
You're right.
And that's more than showing it to us. That's going and seeing it and touring its house.
Getting to know it, watching it use the bathroom.
Right.
It disenchants
everything.
The whole thing. The last thing I discovered and put in my notes, I think might explain why they did this. I don't know for sure though.
Okay.
So this version, with its brief appearance of the alien and Jan's cryptic explanation, is what was shown in theaters for 10 days in April 1980. It was pulled from theaters, and Disney attempted to re-edit the ending without any of the animation. No alien, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But this left test audiences even more confused. And they almost released that ending, but at the last minute decided to rewrite, reshoot, and redo the whole ending again. This is the second conclusion. So we have the original ending. We have this, I don't even know what you call it, up conclusion. And then the official final conclusion.
Wow.
These are the three.
Okay.
They could have just easily completed the animation and re-released the complete film as it had been intended, about 20 minutes longer than what's on the DVD today. But as I alluded to in part 1, to finish the movie as originally planned, Ron Miller would have been assuming responsibility for the movie's failure.
Right, because he's the one that rushed it.
So he scrapped the whole thing, blaming the writing, directing, and the animation team, and started over completely. I don't even know if he asked John Hugh to return. All I know is that Hugh was already on to his next film, The Incubus. So Vincent McVitie was hired to direct the new ending. And the reason he went uncredited is because the DGA requires working a certain number of hours as a director to receive credit.
Okay.
But if Disney was going to spend another $1 million on writing, shooting, printing a brand new conclusion, it needed to be the right one. Several staff writers at Disney wrote and pitched their own versions, but none of these were selected. A number of prominent science fiction writers at the time were each paid individually to write their own conclusion, but none of these were selected. Apparently, all said and done, there were about 152 possible endings.
Don't tell me that.
Either pitched
I'm already confused.
or fully written. I want to read all of these. I want to know everything that was pitched.
Oh my God.
I need to know what these people thought could be an appropriate ending that were not selected.
Right.
Knowing the one that was chosen.
Exactly. What were the others?
I need to know.
Man.
The one that was selected was written by the film's visual effects designer, Harrison Ellenshaw. And I mentioned him last time, but I saved his credits for this moment. He did visual effects for A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
Pete's Dragon, Tron, Something Wicked This Way Comes, Ghost, Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, Superman 4, Michael Jackson's Captain EO, and many others.
So yeah, he's a pro.
Yeah. So Ellenshaw's version concludes the film that we see today, and it released nationwide on October 9th, 1981. The total budget spent was now about $8 to $9 million, and the film grossed only $5 million.
Ouch.
That's because this ending is still considered unsatisfactory. But like you were saying, even with the Otherworld sequence intact with, completed animation and the opening sequence with the doll and everything,
right?
I still don't know if it would have been considered good.
No.
It's
like they had a really good sandwich, but the bread was really soggy. The beginning was
the corners moldy.
The ending was And they had some good stuff in the middle that you wished you could have kept eating, but you really couldn't because the bread was too soggy.
So it's the bread's fault. Thinking moldy crust, moldy cheese,
or
brown lettuce.
If you prefer another metaphor, they couldn't find the right lid for this pot.
Hey, all right.
They tried a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
None of them fit.
That is a problem, I understand.
I'm so strangely disappointed in this whole movie. Like, when I watched it, I just walked away like,
yeah, I know. I was too.
Why?
I was too. I think that's the thing, is that everyone's disappointed when they watch this movie.
They were, yeah.
Unless you saw it when you were like 5 and it scared you to death.
Right. Then it was just scary. But yeah, they worked themselves up into something that they couldn't finish. And it really sucks because it was a lot of people's livelihoods. It was a lot of people's time that they spent.
Mm-hmm.
Like even the dude that you talked about that tried to get it out on DVD, a lot of people have invested a lot of time and energy and thought into this film, and for it to still be so unsatisfactory.
Disappointing, unsatisfactory.
It's just rough. Like when you think about that many minds going into it with the best of intentions, it's really sad when that doesn't work out. And we've told a lot of stories on this show about fictional endeavors of fiction, I should say, that do work out by some magical fictional like juju, you know?
Yeah.
The right people working together at the right time, people being in the right place. And this is an example of a time when they weren't.
Now, this is an example of it just not working.
There were people that tried to champion this film, but it just didn't work.
Right. It's not the movie that Tom Leach wanted to make. It's not the movie that John Hughes wanted to make, or Scott Bosco.
Not that
and
it's
matters,
also not...
But it's not the movie that we wanted.
It's not the movie that the book deserved either, from what I am hearing from you.
I was about to say, it's also not the movie that Florence Randall would have wanted.
But I guess that's the piece we're missing now.
Yeah.
Is that you need to share with us, those of us who are less informed, how the book ends.
So if you're asking yourself, why was the extraterrestrial component even an option in the first place?
Yeah.
Aside from space-centric films like Alien and Star Wars, the real answer lies within the novel itself. Do you remember the hollow in the oak tree?
I do.
When the Carstairs are on their way back from a nice family picnic at the pond in the woods, also attended by Mark. It's Mark, by the way.
This one is Mark.
Who is always there to impress Jan with his knowledge of the woods.
And motocross skills in the movie.
A picnic, where they officially realize Ellie is a mouthpiece for the Watcher because Narek means Karen. And she writes, "Door open, help Karen." A picnic, where Mr. and Mrs. Carstairs go for a walk and come back with their clothes and hair all disheveled. And they explain that they lied down and accidentally fell asleep.
They accidentally fell asleep. Okay.
On their way back from this eventful picnic, Jan is drawn to the oak hollow, so she and Mark take a look inside. And this is what Jan saw. There, framed on the backdrop of that cold, heavy darkness, was what seemed to be a life-size negative of a photograph. Suspended in space, and imprinted upon it, fixed in time, was the image of a girl. And there's another scene where the Watcher takes over their television set, and it's only Jan and Mr. Carstairs there to see what happens. And the Watcher shows them a visual depiction of what it is and where it came from, but only by using visuals that they, simple humans, can comprehend. So this might just be a drawing of a cigar, not the cigar itself.
Right.
So this here is the simplest way I can condense the information. And it's also where I make good on my promise to mention the space-time continuum.
Okay.
Buckle in.
I'm holding all the space that I can for this movie and this story.
Karen is stuck in a mirror world, a parallel universe on the other side of the Big Bang.
Whoa.
The Watcher shows that time and space are continually moving outward in one direction. And this is the fabric of reality that humans are aware of.
Yeah.
But she implies that time and space are also continually moving in the opposite direction.
Okay.
That is the universe where the Watcher comes from. An opposite version of Earth that is seemingly idyllic, where these spectral humanoid aliens live in harmony with the universe.
Good for them.
They're beautiful, telepathic, and wholly benevolent. And because space-time is expanding at a slower rate on their side of the Big Bang, a single day on this planet is 50 years on Earth.
Whoa.
And this all comes from Einstein's theory of general relativity. You know, like gravity being a distortion of space-time.
Yeah. I've read about this since I was a kid because that
out.
interests me. Because time is relative. It's all like...
Completely.
You know, time is our perception.
Yeah.
You know?
These aliens have a rite of passage tradition where one of their children spends a single day on Earth observing human nature. They do this by gathering around a portal and linking hands, like the Who's in Whoville around a Christmas tree. Some might even call it...
Ring around the rosy.
Yeah, ring around the rosy. And they all sing and focus their telepathic energies on teleporting the child in question to the other side of existence.
So I was right.
Yes, exactly.
I was way more right than I meant to be.
I told you.
I was making a joke. Damn.
At the exact moment that this portal was opening and the child, aka the Watcher, was passing through, Karen was mesmerized by a bright light and the sound of singing inside the tree. And the force of that doorway being open pulled her inside. So Karen and the child crossed each other in time and space. And then the door closed, not to be opened again for a whole day. It just so happens that 24 hours on this planet is 50 years on Earth. Like the Watcher says in the novel, there is no return, but there is a going forth. Meaning that if Miss Aylwood is going to be reunited with Karen, she herself will have to venture through the open portal to the other side. And that's how the book ends, with Jan essentially promising that they'll help Mrs. Aylwood get back to the portal in time for the door to open. So the novel ends very abruptly and seemingly too soon because the story itself isn't over yet.
Yeah.
And this is why the ending was open to interpretation for Disney to change the intended conclusion.
Because they wanted the reader to imagine what happened. Either she got there and she went through, or she didn't go through.
It's up to you to decide what happens in your own mind.
Schrodinger's portal.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah. The book itself has been criticized for being incomplete. But if you ask me, the whole point is lost on these critics. It's really too much to explain here, but it has a lot to do with Jan's stream of consciousness musings on how fairy tales end with "and they lived happily ever after." And what that means and how you quantify that in terms of being human and mortal.
I get that. Like, if you're always happy, then it's not an end. Like, nothing ever happens. You know, like, yeah, there's like a weird, then what is ever after? How long does ever after
It
last?
feels a lot like Shirley Jackson's Journey's End and Lover's Meeting.
Journey's End and Lover's Meeting.
If it ends with the Lover's Meeting, isn't there a whole love story there? So Florence Randall, through Jan, ends the narrative in her own unspoken version of "and they lived happily ever after," proving that there's always more to come after the end. And if you're wondering, this is a metaphor for mortality.
Right.
The alien planet is an allegory for the afterlife, aka eternity.
Right.
That's why you can go forth, but you can't return. So on Earth, the beginning is already the end. But on this other planet, the end is only the beginning.
And Karen is dead for all intents and purposes.
Karen is dead. Karen died. And for Mrs. Aylwood to be with her, she too has to die.
She died too.
So in my opinion, this is the reason why all the film's endings are unsatisfactory in one way or another.
Because they don't go there.
They wanted their own version of happily ever after at all costs. And that cost was a semi-forgotten failure of a movie. A company embarrassment that they tried to bury in the damp Disney crypt long ago, leaving it behind in the cold shadows of its own dark ages.
Disney's need for a happily ever after was its own undoing.
That's right. And it will be yours too, if you don't check in with reality every once in a while.
Damn.
Yeah, and
damn.
Disney didn't attempt horror, really, again, for another 17 years.
Yeah.
When they hired DJ McHale to make the Tower of Terror film.
Which in that, they do kind of talk about death and life. And they don't, of course, this was the 90s, so they had learned a lot in 17 years.
Learned a lot. And they hired a guy who had already done it successfully for 5 seasons of Are You Afraid of the Dark? But I wondered if, like, because you kind of talked about how in that Tower of Terror episode, they sort of like swept it under the rug before it ever premiered. Like, they released some other movie at the same time it was supposed to come out. They sabotaged the release
their own film
of Tower of Terror. And I wonder if
they minimized it.
I was wondering, do you think it might be because of Watcher's failure?
Maybe they
wanted to make it, but they didn't want to put too much stock in it.
They anticipated it being difficult to market or difficult, so they just said, let's just put it out there and see who watches it. I don't know.
It's kind of shitty.
Like, why put the effort in? Why put the effort in to all of this? That's what I don't understand. And I understand that things don't always go the way that you expect them to. And everybody probably started out with the best of intentions, but like, especially when they knew it wasn't working and they spent so much time and money on the ending over and over. Like, why are you still pouring resources into something that's not working? And just me, having lived in some of those creative decision-making processes, for me, my first step is, whoa, dial it way back. What is the most simplified thing that we can do to make this work?
Yeah.
And I think if they had done some version of the of the Jan explains it all ending, if they had done some version of that with the portal and life and death and time, instead of the magnetic pull of the lunar eclipse with the sun and the 12th star.
They tried to like explain it. It backfired.
I think that the less details, the better. And the more existential, the better. And I think that would have solved, I mean, here I am sitting here 40 years later telling them how to fix it. But like,
I think you're right.
You know, I think that would have solved a lot of their problems. But
I think that came with like more art house stuff.
Yeah, maybe.
But maybe I'm wrong. I think cinema was always about like sensationalism and the scariest looking thing you can imagine.
Right.
And like all this stuff.
Right. Because it was like, well, we have the technology to make this scary alien. So why wouldn't we do that? You know, that's what's novel about this.
I was thinking a lot about that scary alien component and why it feels so out of place. And I don't think the opening scene with the blue beam of light and the doll and all that would have fixed that for me.
No.
And I realized something interesting. We know Disney was trying to capitalize on a lot of 70s horror. But do you remember how there were some last minute rewrites in July of 1979 done by Jerry Day, who went uncredited because they began filming in August of 79, but these rewrites were done in July.
Yeah. And they'd rushed to get some rewrites. Yeah.
But I couldn't help but notice another very popular film that came out in June 1979. A little sci-fi horror flick by Ridley Scott named Alien. And I think somebody saw Alien and went, you know how we have an extraterrestrial alien thing in this movie, in this script? Let's fucking do it, man.
That's what we need.
Let's go alien with it. Like, let's make it scary, dude. Like, I don't know what they were smoking, but I think that's what they did.
Yeah, maybe.
I can't prove that, and I bet nobody would admit it, but I think they went, somebody fix this. Hire a new writer, no credit. We can pretend like nobody ever even touched it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I burst out laughing personally when I saw it because I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And it's not just from a perspective of watching it in 2023. Like, it just genuinely jarred me.
Yeah.
The way that it looked. It could have just been a beam of light that looked like vaguely human.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like they could have gone so, even if they wanted to keep it all the same way, if they had just gone so much more simple with it, it would not have been so bad.
Yeah. But see, the new animation was all the rage. They're trying to be Star Wars.
They wanted to push the limits. They wanted to be on the cutting edge.
They were trying to be Alien.
Yeah. I get it.
Too much stuff. They tried to do too many things. It should have just been true to the story.
Yeah.
And as promised, I did watch the new Watcher in the Woods from 2017, directed by Melissa Joan Hart.
See, you said it was directed by Melissa Joan Hart.
You didn't watch this, right?
I did not watch it. I was going to let you surprise me with it, but I truly don't know what you could even say at this point.
I know, I've talked so much. What else can I say?
What could you possibly say?
Just some facts. It was produced by Heartbreak Films. Melissa Joan Hart.
Heartbreak. Nice.
Yeah, it's set in the modern day. It's in a small Welsh village. And my logic for that is that the Welsh have a lot of old superstitions tied to church bells, which factor into the plot pretty heavily later.
Okay.
One of the references to the chapel having a bell that falls just as Karen disappears, right? In the 1980 version, 81. It's a big old conglomeration of the movie and the book. So there are lots of references to both, some of which are purely visual. Like, for example, Ellie doesn't get a dog, but she gets a doll. And she names it Narek.
Okay.
But we do have a separate scene where she plays with a dog.
Why didn't they just give her the dog?
There's also like a fun fair scene that ties into, like, it's an annual festival of sorts.
Right.
So they played that up. And there is an eclipse, but I don't think it really has anything to do with Karen's disappearance. It's just there as a reference.
Okay.
It also really latched onto the Ring Around the Rosie rhyme. So they played up the whole idea that it's based on the Black Plague, but that's considered a myth, technically.
Is it really?
Yeah. But do you know
it's a myth that it's based on? Yeah, no, I know. Ring Around the Rosy, Pocket Full of Posy for the smell of the bodies in the plague. And
yeah, well, for anybody who doesn't know, like they get the myth wrong, which is funny. Ring Around the Rosy is the boils you get on your skin.
Yeah. Ring Around the Rosy. Mm-hmm.
The buboes.
Yes.
Pocket Full of Posy, they believed for a long time that how the plague spread was the miasma of the plague, the smell of death.
Yeah.
And the smell, they thought good smells,
sweet smelling things,
would ward off bad smells. Ashes is the American version, supposed to mean that the only way to really take care of the dead is to burn the bodies, which became a truth of the Black Plague. The English version is a tissue, which is the written version of a sneeze. And sneezing was supposed to be a symptom of the plague. We all fall down is we all die.
Right.
That whole idea didn't come about till after World War II. So historians before never attributed the nursery rhyme to the plague. It was supposed to mean other things. The actual true origin of it is lost to history. So no one really knows. So it could be. But that idea didn't come up until
after World War II.
80 years ago.
Whoa. Because somebody sitting around was like, wait a second, these dots connect.
Yeah, somebody just pieced it together.
Doing what we do.
But correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right.
So it's more of a fun fairy tale. It's folklore.
Right.
So they really played up the Black Plague.
Dang.
In a way that does not suit the budget.
Okay.
It's starring Angelica Houston.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it features Benedict Taylor as John Keller. Benedict Taylor played Mike, but he plays John Keller in the new version.
Okay, cool. Cool.
They kept the whole friend group, but they turned the night that Karen went missing into a prank that Karen was playing on the others. So they flipped it. So technically it was her own doing. And they used Mark, his name is Mark. They used Mark the way he's used in the book. And they also used the big tree. And they kept the triangle and the X window cracks, so the mirror cracks. They combined them. So it goes from, this is a visual, this is an auditory medium.
Yep.
I'm doing this for
I'll describe what he's doing with his hand.
They do the triangle upside down.
They do, okay, upside down triangle.
Upside down triangle, and then they cross the bottom.
Okay, yeah.
Into an X.
Yeah. It's an X with a triangle at the top.
Okay, yeah. Just draw a line at the top of an X, and that's what it is.
That's it.
And they played up Mrs. Aylwood being a witch. And not only is the Watcher a whole town legend, an ancient town legend, but it isn't an alien at all. But I'm going to leave it at that and not spoil it.
Okay, yeah. We might go, me and the listeners might go watch that now. Maybe.
It was much more ambitious than the budget allowed for a Lifetime TV movie. So, I mean, I'm not going to give it too much shade, throw too much shade. I mean, I won't talk bad about...
Don't you talk bad about Melissa Joan Hart.
I won't talk about her directing style. I won't talk bad about the script. I won't talk bad about the day for night blue filters.
I was about to say, but in saying that, you are talking...
I won't talk bad about the lighting or the sound editing or the color grading or the acting or the set design.
I get real frustrated with a bad day for night filter.
I'm not going to talk bad about any of those things because I love Melissa Joan Hart and she just tried her little heart out.
I mean, again, how ambitious to take this mess of a movie and say, I could do it.
I can make it work. It's funny because a lot of the combining of everything, all the themes and the canon of it all, it's something that we would do, conceptually, you and me.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Conceptually, it's really cool.
We approach things that way. Yeah.
Right. It just didn't really work that well for me. But I now have a Lifetime movie club membership. So
hey, something good came out of all this.
But one of the coolest things for real though is that they say Karen went missing 36 years ago. This movie premiered on Lifetime in 2017, making 36 years ago 1981.
Nice.
The year that Disney's official Watcher movie premiered.
Nice.
Kind of a fun thing.
That's a good little nod.
Good nod, yeah.
The repeating, the other horror trope, the repeating 30-year cycles. Or, cycles in general, repeating generational cycles of a horror.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was good timing for it. Again, the original movie should never have been Disney. and the remake should not have been Lifetime.
Yeah.
And it should have either been DJ McHale doing a true book adaptation, or it should have been a Mike Flanagan, just over the top, crazy haunting version of it.
Series.
Could be a series.
One of those two things could still work. You never know.
Full reimagining. Yeah.
Damn.
But anyway, that's what I've got. And if you're still confused, I don't blame you, because I kind of am too.
It's really tough. Yeah.
It's hard to keep up
Thank
with.
you for trying to make sense of it for us.
Yeah.
So that we didn't have to.
Thanks for listening and giving me a place to talk about it and just scream about it, because my God, I feel like I've been crazy, because I first decided to do this like over a month ago.
You did, yeah.
And then I didn't have enough time, and I wanted to read the book, and I wanted to do the whole, give it the full treatment.
And then at first you wanted it to be one episode.
I was thinking it would be like nothing.
Ha.
One episode easy.
These things always grow.
And then there's way more lore to it.
What a movie.
Man, oh.
What a book.
Man. What a time.
What a time.
September 1st, man. Labor Day weekend.
Labor Day weekend. Well, that for us, not for you guys. You've already passed up your short week.
Spooky season, man.
Like, what a weird movie. What a weird like ethos that it inspired online and in like the film community.
I know.
Just strange all the way around, and pretty dark.
Ooh, and pretty dark.
In some cases and versions.
I want to find, there's supposed to be a bunch of like, Scott Bosco apparently filmed a bunch of interviews for like DVD extras. And that's supposed to be on the Anchor Bay version that came out. That does exist. I don't have that one. I have the official Disney release.
Okay.
So I want to see like director commentary, producer commentary. I want to see all that.
I'm shocked that we have gotten through this whole series without that. Honestly, I'm like, damn, there's so much to say.
I'm sure there is, but there's only so much time too. Like
no. That's what I'm saying. But I'm like, how much deeper does the rabbit hole go? You know,
it keeps going.
It just doesn't seem like it's gonna stop.
But most of that we're gonna explore when we do our Scott Bosco Patreon bonus episode.
Speaking of Patreon, did you just say speaking of Patreon?
Sure did.
We have a patron to thank.
Yeah, a new one.
Thank you, Symphony, for being patron and supporting us on Patreon.
Thanks for joining our Patreon and our Discord.
Yeah.
It's been real nice talking to you.
Nice.
Yeah. So if you guys want to do that same thing and talk to us on a real human level about spooky season or whatever, you can go to patreon.com/TPD podcast.
Yes, you can. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us at That's Pretty Dark on TikTok, at That's Pretty Dark Podcast on Instagram.
That's right.
And I'm always trying to post stuff up there. So come and encourage me in my madness.
Yeah. And if you want to wear some of our merch that we're trying to push, you can go to that'sprettydark.com and go to our merch tab.
If you want.
You want to match our spooky energy.
Yeah.
You feel really cool.
No pressure.
It's a great Halloween gift for everyone you know.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Perfect Halloween present.
Coffee mugs, t-shirts.
Next time we join you guys will be for another dive back into Courage the Cowardly Dog.
That's right.
And then we'll be celebrating 2 years of podcasting with a mega October extravaganza. So
I can't wait.
We're so close.
I'm so ready.
I
get to begin my research now that I'm done with this.
Yeah. Now it's time for your October research.
Black hollow in a large oak tree inside of a chapel growing out of a coffin
with a negative image
on a full moon under an eclipse. I mean, have fun this spooky season, you know. Go find an abandoned chapel. Go host a seance. Have a lot of fun. Honestly, tell us about it. I mean, just live it up and death it up.
Like I said, send us pictures of your decoration.
Send us pictures.
Please.
But, you know, try to keep a firm grasp on reality and all of your friends so that they don't go missing.
Right.
But if they do go missing, tell the police. Like, talk about it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Don't just be quiet for 30 years.
Sit by a brooding fire with your whiskey like I'm going to do all winter long. Thanks for listening, guys.
Keep writing backwards on your mirrors. Those other side folks love to see it.
Yeah. Hold up a candle. See what you see behind you.
Happy almost spooky season. To you, Christian.
Oh, thank you.
To Narek. To everybody.
And to the watcher, wherever you are.
Thanks for listening to That's Pretty Dark, written and produced by Christian Baxter Mott and Kaylin Andrews.
Our music is composed by Jonathan Simmons, and our art is provided by Paige Garland at Power Girl Illustration.
Join the collective nostalgia and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at That's Pretty Dark Podcast.
Share your experiences and let us know what shows, films, or villains still haunt you from childhood at that'sprettydarkpodcast@gmail.com. Remember, you're never really alone.
So until next time, sweet dreams, everyone.
When you said opera, I thought he was a serious musician.
I have a very soft touch late at night.